Hello and welcome to Manny Bil. And for once I am actually recording this in my car, living up to my name, Manny Bil, which means something like man in a car. And what I was thinking of was connecting a few comments to a recent video of mine called Analytic Idealism is Baloney, which is sort of a wordplay on Bernardo Kastrup's book called Materialism is Baloney. So what I haven't planned out any huge talk here or anything like that. I'm just trying to refrain from my gut feeling. But the takeaway for me recently is that I have identified the core problem of the philosophy of his, right? And one thing I am reminded of, I have sort of come to think of recently, is that if there's something about somebody's philosophy that sort of haunts you, it's not the best word to use, but for the lack of a better term, you keep coming back to wanting to, understand what the hell is he talking about? What is this? There's something about it I understand and I agree with, but there's also something that sort of rubs me the wrong way, or, I use that term a lot, right? Rubs me the wrong way. And it's sort of and I'm talking from my own experience, right? I keep coming back because there's something about it. I haven't pinpointed exactly what it is, but there's something that just doesn't gel. And my point is that it's very likely to be a foundational problem. It's on the earliest stages of a series of arguments, right? Like if you're starting off with something like, of course this is the case, as I have pointed out in a recent video of his, or in the same video that I'm referring to here, right? Analytic Idealism is Baloney. That is a problem, right? And that's a problem. That's just too easy. You can't just say, of course that's the case, right? Because it's not philosophical. There has to be more. You have to do better than that, in my opinion, right? It's not good enough, because you can then always use that argument. Of course, it just follows, right? Why is this the case? And then the philosopher will say, well, it's obvious, right? That's not an argument, right? And another part that I pinpointed, and maybe the most important part, right, is that the whole idea of mind being a reduction base doesn't work. Because what he says is something like, mind is everything, right? Everything is mind. So you can't reduce it any further if everything is mind. That's the bottom layer, right? And he has said that also explicitly several times in podcasts and presentations, as far as I'm concerned, right? So if mind is the reduction base, which is sort of, if you keep asking for a definition, and then if you define that, you ask for a new definition of those terms used, and so on, and you keep going in that, recursive fashion, at some point you will reach a situation where you can't define any further, because the recent term you used has no definition. I mean, you can't keep on defining things, otherwise you would inevitably, I think, run into a circular argument. You will come back to square one and use one of the terms you have already used in a definition to define a definition further down the line. You just forgot that you used that term to define something 50 steps ahead, right? So that reduction base is when you can't define what is mind, for instance, right? Well, you can't define it any further, in my opinion, right? Or at least in Bernardo Kastrup's opinion. And I'm not trying to define it because it's not my reduction base, right? But the point is that first of all, how can you reduce something into everything, right? If you keep reducing, you're sort of creating something that is smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller into the constitutional parts. You can't reduce something into everything, because then you haven't been reducing, right? There has been no reduction going on. So from a etymological or a semantic point of view, it doesn't make sense to call it a reduction base, right? And another thing is, if it's everything, there's just one thing that is mind, and everything is explained from that, which I don't believe he does, but he just says it rhetorically, right? Then how can you explain anything with everything? You can't explain any part of that everything, because it's a reduction base, because then it doesn't have any parts. Otherwise you haven't done the reduction, right? So you can't explain anything unless it's everything, and that is mind, right? Because that's the reduction base. So there's nothing to explain, because you have to explain everything in one go, called mind. That's it, and it's reduction base, which is the same as saying you can't split it up in further parts, right? And if it's everything, you can't go the other way either, build on top of that reduction base. Usually, if you have reduced something, you can wind it the way back, and you try to establish things from that reduction base and upwards, so to say. But if it's everything, you can't build on top of everything, because you have just said it is everything. So you're locked inside this singularity of everything. So you actually created nothing. You have just slammed one term of everything called mind, and then done, in my opinion, right? You've just said mind, and therefore everything explained, whatever term, right? It's simply ridiculous, man, right? So what is actually going on with Bernardo Kastrup? Well, he has used the term mind stuff a few times, right? Mind stuff. It's made of mind stuff, which is a very, very implicit appeal to some superstring theory of everything of mind, right? Mind is made of small little mind stuffers, right? So that's a new hidden kind of reduction base, right? It's sort of implicitly hidden, right? Or it's explicitly hidden but implicitly revealed by him using the term. So apparently he seems to think that there are little mind units of which everything is made, right? But that makes it's impossible for mind to then be a reduction base. If mind is everything, then mind cannot be everything, right? Then mind is little units of mind. Mind units, you could say, right? That you pile them together, then you just have some more mind, so to say, right? It doesn't explain anything, in my opinion. It doesn't account for anything. It's an artificial side story that he keeps tapping into whenever anyone asks him about what it is foundational. He just said mind, and then thinking he has explained anything, and then he jumps back into talking about all sorts of experiences and aspects and objects and empiricism and so on, that is sort of disconnected from this reduction base. Because the only important aspect of a reduction base is that all of the rest of your philosophy has to be clearly traceable back to the reduction base. using whatever arguments or statements or definitions or axioms or whatever you're going to use. It has to be clearly traceable back to that reduction base. Now, how do you trace an elephant back to mind, right? If mind is everything, then the elephant is also a part of the mind, right? So how does that work? You can't have a reduction base that is everything, because then it makes no sense to talk about the elephant, because it's made up of the same kind of everything that is everything else also, right? You're lost in this kind of singular plurality. I don't know what word to put on it, because it's so freaking crazy, in my opinion, that when you start to feel like you're losing the foundation under your feet and you're being manipulated, just throwing words around that may sound like they're sort of fanciful and to some degree philosophical, be cautious, be alert, right? Because you're probably being manipulated, with or without the philosopher's goodwill or not, right? It might be I could talk about something that I have misunderstood, right? And talk about very concerned about this, which I believe to be correct. And you might be convinced because I sound so convincing and so on. But it may be incorrect because I just didn't get it, right? But because I sound convincing, you believe me. Or you find, okay, it sounds plausible, whatever, right? It might not be out of nefarious, intentions, right? It might just because he believes in something that is not correct. It doesn't function, but he's sufficiently articulate and absorbed in his own, greatness, awesomeness, right? That he is. You're convinced that he's convincing, right? So I encourage you to be very, very cautious with idealism, and particularly Bernardo Kastrup and his analytic idealism, because as I pointed out, there are huge problems, right? These are not just problems. This is sort of a level of sort of, it doesn't work. This is dysfunctional. I'm not going there. I'm not treating it as a problem. I'm treating it as garbage, right? I'm throwing it out. I'm not saying I have to figure this out. I want to figure out if there's anything to it. But to this, at this point, I have sort of classified it as baloney, right? It doesn't work. The philosophy doesn't work. At least he has to come up with some better philosophy, because this is garbage, in my opinion, right? So that's what I had today. See you in the next one.